Guys. So we're talking about India, and we looked at what the Europeans, especially the British, did in Africa. So we're going to focus on what the British were doing in India. So our essential question, so as I'm giving these notes and you're watching this lecture, you're going to focus on what's the impact of British rule on India. Just as you saw British rule and we've seen European rule affect Africa, how does it affect India? So a couple things to remember. You'll see certain slides marked Age of Exploration, for example. They will match the titles on your note page. Some of them will be additional information, and you're free to write additional notes. So we go back to the Age of Exploration when Europeans set out to explore. And remember that one of the first ones was they were trying to find that water route to India by going around Africa. And the Portuguese, we did this with the PBA, it was Vasco da Gama in 1498 who sailed from Portugal around Africa to India. That set off the age of exploration. So they didn't just go to the Americas, they also went to Asia. In India, you have the British, French, Portuguese, Dutch merchants competing for control of the Indian trade. Vasco da Gama. So the age of imperialism at first was not a threat. You had the Mughal Empire. Remember the Mughals built the Taj Mahal. They were a strong empire. They were in control of India. But by the 1700s, they begin to decline. And what you have is you have two religious, well, you have more than two religious, but your main religious groups in India are the Hindus and Muslims, and they begin fighting. So what ends up happening, the British move in, the British and French, the Europeans move in, and they take advantage of this decline to really develop even more trading posts and get more actively involved in India. So in the 1700s, you have a fight for control between Britain, France. The Mughal Empire is falling apart. Britain and France are competing. You end up in a war. Britain and France end up in a war, and eventually Britain gains control of the Indian Trade Company. But it's not the British government. It is this group, the British East India Company, and they take complete control of India. France is kicked out of India. So the British East India Company, they are going to literally become the government in India. It's like a private institution. It would be like Walt Disney World running Virginia, for example, or running its own country. So it's a corporation, not the British government. The British East India Company is completely in control. One of the things that the British East India Company do is they need an army. They hire young Indian males, sepoys, and they put them in the British Army. They join the British East India Company. They are part of the British Army. So sepoys are Indian soldiers in the British Army. And I thought I ran a spell check, but I guess it didn't pick that up, guys. I know I did not spell soldiers correctly. Looks a little bit better. Probably not the best. All right. So you have these sepoys who are Indian soldiers in the British Army. Next, these sepoys, they were part of the British Army. In fact, they went out. They will fight British battles, not just in India. The British East India Company is going to use these sepoys to take direct political and military control. All right. They are taking complete military and political control. All right. So what's going on? So with this, the British Parliament, basically up until about 1857, the British East India Company Nobody is overseeing what they're doing until 1857, when these sepoy, these Indian soldiers in the British Army, they begin to revolt. They revolt against the East India Company, and that is going to force the British government to take a stronger control. So what is this rebellion? In 1857, you have the Sepoy Mutiny or Rebellion, because they're angered with the British East India Company. The Sepoys are angered with the British East India Company because they're attempting to spread Christianity. These are Hindus and Muslims. They feel disrespected by the company. There's economic problems. There's all kinds of problems. But the biggest one is this attempt to spread Christianity and not feeling valued. They felt discriminated against in their own country. And one of the things that happens is you get the greased bullet rumor. One of the things, the British Army introduces a new gun, and this new gun has a bullet. And the way that you load the bullet is it's in a paper cartridge, and you have to put it in your mouth, and then you load the gun. Well, to keep it so the paper slides out, the bullet is greased. So a rumor started that these bullets were greased in pork and beef fat. Muslims can't touch pork. Hindus can't touch beef. So these sepoy soldiers refused to use these guns, and they were forced. They begin a mutiny, and what you end up having is the sepoys feel like they are not they feel disrespected. This mutiny spreads. You have different groups of Indians revolting. It just doesn't stay with the sepoys. Different individual rulers, peasants, middle class, many people see it as an opportunity to free from British control. The Sepoy Rebellion will be put down violently by the British. There will be violence on both sides. By 1858, the uprising is over, and at that point, the British East India Company is not in direct control. You have direct control of India by Britain. This is the term called the British Raj. That's when the British government has direct control. Okay? So the London is running it. In fact, you'll see this in 1877. Queen Victoria is declared Empress of India. So until 1947, your British monarchs will be considered emperors or empresses of India. India for the British Empire. The British Empire owns colonies all over the world. The most important colony to them, though, is India. It's the jewel of the crown. The resources and markets that India provides is amazing. And in fact, one of the things you'll see is the British while the Suez Canal is built, the British support the building of the Suez Canal and will take control of the Suez Canal because that will shorten the trip between Britain and India. So, what was it like to live in the British Raj, or when the British controlled India? Well, India's customs and that were not recognized. Indians were encouraged to speak, dress, and act like Europeans. The British officials, that superiority again, believe that they are doing the best when they are getting these civilizations to follow the superior European customs or Western customs. It's Westernization. So Western culture was encouraged. You're learning English. When you go to school, school is in English. All right. You're going to create an educated upper class of Indians, as you've seen in other places, to help run the colony. The schools were modeled after British learning, the Western dress. One of the things, though, that the British do is they build tons of infrastructure. Infrastructure are roads, telephones, electrical grids. The biggest one that unites India is the railroad, but they're building it not to help the Indians. They're building it for control of the Indians. All right. You'll see um, economic controls in India. India is going to be forced to buy British goods. India is going to be supplying cheap cheap materials to British factories. So India's job is not to make India better, it's to make Britain stronger and better. So Britain is going to discourage any native industries. India at one time was one of the major textile producers. Britain shuts down their textile industry. One of the things that India was able to do before it became a colony of Britain, they were able to grow enough food to sustain their population. When Britain comes in, they force the Indians to grow cash crops, indigo cotton, for example. So as a result, you're going to have famines. People are going to be starving in India because they won't be able to grow food because they're forced to grow the cash crops. One of the big cash crops they're growing is opium, right? India's population, though, during this time did grow because you did bring in doctors and hospitals, and you were educating to help the Indians. Um, India will become, because of the population growing, you have large cities developing in India. You have, like I said, you have Indians trained in the British education system. One of the things, though, that the British understand is they cannot have Hindus and Muslims unite. So Britain actually puts in policies that keep Hindus and Muslims um, apart. But that's in the 1800s when the British Raj comes in, you're going to get Indians getting this idea of nationalism. Remember how ideas spread? Well, British nationalism comes in and Indians begin to develop Indian nationalism. And your two groups, Hindus and Muslims, are going to form two organizations. The Hindus are going to adopt the Indian National Congress, and that Indian National Congress is made up of majority Hindus. Gandhi and Nehru will be the leaders of that. Your Muslim League, Muslims, even though they are a minority in India, they are still a large population. They are going to say, in large Muslim areas, let us become independent. They're going to fight for that India be split, and they're going to have an independent Pakistan and an independent India, and they're going to be led by Jinnah. So methods that they use for independence, same things that people use for protests today: strikes, boycotts, demonstrations. One of the big things, though, is you're not going to have the military battle that you have in a lot of other places for independence. You're going to get Gandhi is going to lead by civil disobedience, which means you resist unjust laws. Very similar to the same types of methods that Martin Luther King Jr. used in the civil rights movement. In fact, Martin Luther King Jr. actually was read about Gandhi and used his methods. 1947, Britain is going to grant India its independence, and it's going to split. India is going to split into Pakistan and India. And you're going to have that Hindu Muslim, just as you, because it's not a natural border, and just as you have the border between African countries because it doesn't work as nicely, you're going to still have tensions today. In fact, India and Pakistan still have today have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. So we talked about imperialism in India, boycott, stop buying British goods. Um, we talked about Pakistan, your Indian National Congress. This is the best known. I mean, as we know, you have more than one leader, more than one leader. One of the things with Gandhi is a perfect example. Remember how I talked about schools were put in for direct control, but then people learned the ideas? Well, when we talk about Gandhi, he was a law student. He was trained in England. He went to school in England. He then went to South Africa, where he was discriminated against, and that's where he begins his fight. He spent 21 years in South Africa, saw racism, saw the separation of races, and he takes those methods that he develops in South Africa and he's going to take them to India, which is going to lead to independence. And eventually, India is able to get its independence. So I hope this helps. I know there was a lot more information that was in the notes, but I wanted to give you that, looking at political impacts, boundaries, control, social impacts. But your big one is your economic, where it's destroying the industries.